Emma, it's 2 p.m. Are you seriously still in bed? David's voice cut through my foggy consciousness like a knife. I struggled to open my eyes, feeling the familiar heaviness that seemed to press me into the mattress. My name is Emma Mitchell, and at 32, I couldn't understand why I was always so exhausted. I'm getting up, I mumbled, fighting against the overwhelming urge to close my eyes again. David stood in the doorway, his face twisted with frustration and something else, disappointment. This is getting ridiculous, he said, yanking open the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, making me wince. You've slept through another meeting. Your boss called me again. Do you even care about your job anymore? I did care. I cared so much it hurt. But no matter how many alarms I set, no matter how many cups of coffee I drank, I couldn't seem to stay awake. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was bone deep, all-consuming, and nothing seemed to help. I'm trying, David, I whispered, finally managing to sit up. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the edge of the bed to steady myself. Something's wrong. This isn't normal tiredness. He scoffed, a sound I've become painfully familiar with over the past year. What's wrong is that you stay up late watching Netflix and then act surprised when you can't wake up. You're just lazy, Emma. Everyone gets tired, but the rest of us manage to be functional adults. The words stung, but they weren't new. Over the past year, as my condition had worsened, David's patience had eroded. Gone was the supportive husband who used to bring me tea when I wasn't feeling well. In his place was this frustrated, angry man who seemed convinced I was choosing to ruin my life, and by extension his. I'm going to see a doctor, I said, reaching for my phone. There has to be an explanation. Another doctor? David threw his hands up in exasperation. We've already wasted thousands on blood tests and vitamins. They all say the same thing. You're perfectly healthy. You just need to get your act together. But the doctors hadn't all said the same thing. The last one, Dr. Carter, had mentioned something about a sleep study. She'd seemed concerned when I described how I could sleep for 14 hours and still wake up exhausted. How I'd experience episodes of sudden muscle weakness when laughing or feeling strong emotions. Dr. Carter referred me to a sleep specialist, I said, showing him the appointment confirmation on my phone. The consultation is next week. David grabbed the phone from my hand, scanning the details. His expression darkened. $2,000 for someone to watch you sleep? Absolutely not. We can't keep throwing money away on your hypochondria. It's my money, I said quietly, a spark of defiance cutting through the fog. From my personal savings. Money you should be contributing to our future. We're supposed to be saving for a house, remember? Or has your constant sleeping made you forget about our plans too? The argument that followed was familiar. My laziness was ruining our marriage. I was becoming a burden. His friends' wives managed to work full-time jobs without needing naps like a toddler. By the time he left for work, slamming the door behind him, I was fighting back tears. I dragged myself to the shower, trying to wash away the hurt along with the sleep. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, dark circles under my eyes. Despite having just slept for over 12 hours, I hardly recognized myself anymore. That afternoon, I received a call from my boss. It was the third meeting I'd missed this month, and her patience was wearing thin. Emma, I've tried to be understanding, but this can't continue. Either you get this sorted out, or we'll have to discuss your position with the company. I hung up and finally let the tears fall. Everything I'd worked for was slipping away. My career, my marriage, my dignity. David's words echoed in my head. Lazy, dramatic, hypochondriac. But as I sat there, fighting to keep my eyes open despite having just woken up, I knew in my heart that something was seriously wrong. With trembling fingers, I confirmed the sleep study appointment. David might never forgive me for spending the money, but I couldn't keep living like this. I needed answers, even if they weren't the ones my husband wanted to hear. What I didn't know then was that the sleep study would reveal something that would shake our lives to the core and make David regret every cruel word he'd ever said to me about being lazy. The sleep center looked more like a hotel than a medical facility. As I checked in for my overnight study, David's last words before I left rang in my ears. Don't expect me to coddle you when this turns out to be another waste of money. Dr. Martinez, the sleep specialist, was different from the other doctors I'd seen. She didn't dismiss my symptoms or suggest I just needed a better bedtime routine. Instead, she listened intently as I described the crushing fatigue, the sudden muscle weakness when I laughed or felt strong emotions, and the vivid dreams that sometimes felt more real than reality. These symptoms are concerning, she said, making detailed notes. Especially the muscle weakness. You mentioned it happens with strong emotions. I nodded, remembering the incident at my niece's birthday party when I collapsed while laughing, much to David's embarrassment. He half carried, half dragged me to the car, lecturing me about making the scene. We're going to do a comprehensive study tonight, Dr. Martinez explained. We'll monitor your brain waves, heart rate, breathing, and muscle movements. It might seem like a lot of equipment, but try to sleep as naturally as possible. As the technician attached the various sensors to my head and body, I felt a mix of hope and fear. What if David was right? What if they found nothing wrong with me? The night passed in fragments of consciousness. I remembered the technician's voice through the intercom, asking me to sleep on my back, then my side. I remembered the vivid dreams that always plagued me, and the strange sensation of being awake and asleep at the same time. The next morning, instead of sending me home with a wait for our call, Dr. Martinez asked me to stay for an additional test called the multiple sleep latency test, and it's LLT. We need to measure how quickly you fall asleep during the day, she explained. Every 2 hours, you'll have the opportunity to nap while we monitor you. By late afternoon, I was exhausted from the repeated nap tests, but Dr. Martinez's expression had changed from professional interest to intense concern. She asked me to come to her office, where she pulled up several graphs on her computer screen. Emma, she began, her voice gentle but serious, your sleep study results are quite significant. During the night, we observed several abnormalities in your sleep architecture, including something called sleep onset REM periods. And during today's nap tests, you fell asleep in an average of less than 3 minutes. My heart began to race. What does that mean? Combined with your symptoms, these results strongly indicate narcolepsy with cataplexy. The muscle weakness you experience with emotions, that's cataplexy, and it's a hallmark sign of type 1 narcolepsy. The word hit me like a physical blow. Narcolepsy, a real neurological condition. Not laziness, not attention-seeking, not poor sleep habits. It's a chronic neurological disorder, Dr. Martinez continued, caused by the brain's inability to regulate sleep-wake cycles normally. Your brain lacks a chemical called hypocretin, which helps maintain wakefulness. This isn't your fault, Emma, and it's certainly not a choice. Tears rolled down my cheeks as years of guilt and self-doubt began to lift. Can you write this down? My husband, he needs to see this. Dr. Martinez nodded, printing out the test results and a detailed explanation of narcolepsy. This condition is often misunderstood. Many patients go years without proper diagnosis, being blamed for symptoms they can't control. But now that we know what we're dealing with, we can start treatment. She prescribed medication and discussed lifestyle adjustments, but I was barely listening. All I could think about was showing these results to David, proving that I wasn't lazy or making excuses. When I got home, David was waiting, his expression already skeptical. Well, what's the verdict on your expensive nap? Without a word, I handed him the folder of test results. He began reading, his dismissive expression slowly morphing into confusion, then shock. Narcolepsy. His voice cracked. But that's a real condition. Yes, I said quietly. A real neurological condition that I've been trying to tell you about while you called me lazy and dramatic. His face paled as he continued reading Dr. Martinez's detailed explanation, especially the part about narcolepsy being a chronic disability. When he reached the section about cataplexy and how it was triggered by emotional responses, I saw his hands begin to shake. All those times, he whispered, when you collapsed while laughing or got weak when you were upset. I thought you were being dramatic. I told everyone you were doing it for attention. The realization of how he treated me seemed to hit him all at once. He looked up at me, his eyes filling with tears, but I wasn't ready for his apology. Not yet. I need to rest, I said, turning toward the bedroom. The testing was exhausting. We can talk more tomorrow. As I closed the door, I heard him sink into a chair, the papers rustling as he continued reading. The sound of his quiet sobbing followed me into sleep, but for the first time in years, I drifted off without feeling guilty about needing to rest. The weeks following my diagnosis brought changes I never expected. David's transformation from skeptic to advocate was dramatic, but it didn't immediately heal the wounds his years of doubt had created. One morning, I found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by printouts about narcolepsy, his eyes red from lack of sleep. I've been researching all night, he said, his voice rough. Why didn't any of the other doctors catch this? How could I have been so blind? I poured myself a cup of coffee, part of my new strictly regulated medication and sleep schedule. It wouldn't have mattered if they had, I replied. You were convinced I was making excuses. His face crumpled. Emma, I don't know how to fix this. Every time I see you take your medication, I remember all the horrible things I said. Every time you need to take a scheduled nap, I remember how I told my family you were just lazy. The medication Dr. Martinez prescribed was helping. I could stay awake for longer periods and the cataplexy attacks were less frequent, but it wasn't a cure. Narcolepsy would be part of my life forever. You know what the worst part was? I said, sitting across from him. It wasn't just the insults or the accusations. It was the loneliness. When I needed my partner most, you became my biggest critic. David reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I need time, I said. I'm still processing everything. Not just the diagnosis, but the years of emotional damage that came before it. He nodded, understanding, finally reflecting in his eyes. What can I do? Start by telling everyone the truth, I said. All those people you told I was lazy or seeking attention, they need to know the real story. That afternoon, David made a public post on social media. He detailed my diagnosis, but more importantly, he acknowledged his own role in making my struggle harder. He apologized for spreading misconceptions about my symptoms and for dismissing a serious medical condition as character flaws. The responses were overwhelming. Other people with invisible illnesses shared their stories of being disbelieved. Some of our friends admitted they judged me based on David's complaints, offering heartfelt apologies. My boss, who'd been ready to fire me, became unexpectedly supportive after receiving documentation about my condition. She worked with HR to arrange accommodations, a flexible schedule, a small office with a reclining chair for scheduled naps, and understanding when I needed to work from home. But the most surprising change came from David's family. His mother, who had often echoed his criticisms about my laziness, showed up at our door in tears. I failed you as a mother-in-law, she said, holding a large binder. I should have supported you, not judged you. The binder contained research on narcolepsy, local support groups, and even recipes designed to help maintain energy levels throughout the day. As months passed, I learned to navigate life with my diagnosis. The medication helped, but I still had bad days. The difference was that now, instead of criticism, I had support. David attended every doctor's appointment, took notes, and asked questions. He downloaded apps to track my medication schedule and made sure our social events aligned with my energy levels. But most importantly, he listened when I talked about how his past behavior had affected me. I need you to understand something, I told him during one of our many conversations about the past. Your apology is accepted, but trust takes time to rebuild. For years, you made me doubt myself, made me feel worthless because of something I couldn't control. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I know, and I'll spend the rest of our lives making it up to you. 1 year after my diagnosis, I started a support group for people with narcolepsy and their families. During our first meeting, I shared my story, including the painful years before diagnosis. David sat in the back of the room, listening as I described the impact of having my symptoms dismissed by the person who was supposed to love me most. After the meeting, a young woman approached us, her husband hovering nervously behind her. Your story, she said, wiping tears from her eyes, it's exactly what we're going through. I've been telling him something's wrong, but David stepped forward. Let me talk to your husband, he said. I know exactly what he's thinking, and I know exactly how wrong he is. Watching him share our story, not just my diagnosis, but his own journey from skeptic to supporter, I felt a complex mix of emotions. The hurt hadn't completely healed, but something new was growing in its place. Purpose. My narcolepsy wasn't just a medical condition anymore. It had become a powerful lesson about trust, validation, and the danger of dismissing someone's struggles. David had learned this lesson the hard way, but his tears during that first diagnosis had marked the beginning of real change. As I watched him earnestly educating others about the condition he'd once dismissed, I realized that sometimes the hardest lessons create the strongest advocates. We couldn't change our past, but we could help others avoid the same painful journey.